Hey, welcome! Today we're diving into the core ideas from David Gray's book, The Jim Crow in Civil Rights Law. Now, this isn't just a look back at history, it's really a framework for understanding how things work right now in what Gray calls the accountability era of civil rights. So, let's jump right in. So, when you hear the phrase Jim Crow, what's the first image that pops into your head? For a lot of us, it's probably the stuff on the left. Those awful whites only signs the raw hate, the social prejudice. And look, those things were absolutely real. But here's the twist. What if the real power of Jim Crow wasn't just in the signs, but in the legal system that gave them authority? The real engine was everything on the right. To really get a handle on this, we've got to look past the idea of Jim Crow as just, random hostility between people. It was way more organized than that. It was a deliberate, highly structured legal system built on a foundation of statutes, public policy, and this is the key part, court decisions that were all designed to enforce segregation. This quote from the book really nails it. It points to a massive distinction, right? I mean, there's a huge difference between a society that just puts up with prejudice and a society that formally authorizes it with the full power of the law. One is a social issue, the other is a state-sponsored system. This really shows you what that looks like in practice. All those things. We could see the separate seats on a bus, the segregated schools, they were just the tip of the iceberg. They were the final product coming off a legal assembly line. So the foundation wasn't just hate, it was legislation, paperwork, and judicial rulings. This wasn't chaos. This was a deliberate legal order. So a really helpful way to think about this is as an architecture of exclusion. Yeah, like a building. This unjust society was built from a very detailed legal blueprint, and all the laws and court cases, those were the steel beams and the concrete pillars holding the whole structure of segregation together. And the cornerstone of that entire blueprint was this three-word phrase, separate but equal. This wasn't just some slogan. It was a legal doctrine established by the Supreme Court itself in the famous 1896 case Plessy versus Ferguson. That one decision basically gave the whole system a constitutional hall pass, letting segregation grow and thrive for decades. So you might be wondering, why was this system so incredibly difficult to fight? Well, the book points to two huge roadblocks. First, people had very limited access to legal knowledge. I mean, how can you challenge a law if you don't even know how the legal system works? And second, even if you did know your rights were being violated, the courts were often hostile places, and getting a real legal remedy was next to impossible. Just because you can get into a courtroom doesn't mean you can get justice. All right, so if the law built this whole system, how did it all fall apart? Well, Jim Crow didn't just sort of fade away. As people's attitudes got better, it collapsed because the law itself was fundamentally changed. The very same tool that was used to build this system of exclusion was eventually the tool used to take it down piece by piece. You can literally watch that transformation happen on this timeline. In 1896, the Supreme Court gives the green light to segregation with Plessy. Then, almost 60 years later, a completely different court slams on the brakes with Brown versus Board of Education, throwing out that same doctrine for public schools. And just 10 years after that, Congress passes the Civil Rights Act, which outlaws discrimination across the board. This wasn't just society changing its mind. This was a legal revolution. That's really the big point here. The law is an incredibly powerful tool. It can be used to create and protect injustice like it did under Jim Crow, but it can also be used as a powerful lever for freedom and equality. The story of how Jim Crow ended is really the story of how people learned to pull that lever. Okay, so all of that brings us to today, because the fight for civil rights looks different now. The battlefield has shifted. It's moved away from fighting those obvious in-your-face signs of exclusion to navigating really complex and often invisible legal standards. Think about it. In the past, the exclusion was impossible to miss. It was printed on a sign. The message was blunt, direct, and totally out in the open. You didn't have to guess what a whites-only sign meant. Today, though, that message can be a lot harder to see. Exclusion isn't usually announced on a sign anymore. It's often buried in procedural language. It's not about who you are, but about whether your claim followed the rules, whether you met the legal standards, or if you had the right kind of evidence. The language is different, but the challenge of navigating a system is still there. And this is exactly what David Gray means when he talks about the accountability era. In a world that runs on rules, procedures, and legal standards, the single most powerful tool you have for protecting your rights is understanding how the system actually works. Civic and constitutional literacy aren't just, nice to haves anymore. They are absolutely essential. So when we look back at the Jim Crow era, it teaches us 3 critical lessons for today. 1. Law isn't just theory. It actively shapes the world we live in. 2. The rights you have on paper are only as real as a court says they are. And 3, and this is maybe the most important, your ability to actually enforce your rights comes down to your own legal literacy. History gives us the inspiration, for sure, but the legal structure is what gives us the power. At the end of the day, this is what it's all about. It is so easy to get frustrated with a system that seems overly complex or confusing, but understanding how that system is put together, building up your own civic literacy, is what turns that raw frustration into a sharp, focused, and effective strategy for accountability. The civil rights movement fought a long, hard battle to change what the law says. The challenge of this accountability era is all about understanding how the law works. So we want to leave you with this one question to think about. The law was changed to include. Do you know how to use it? Answering that question is really the work of our time. So if you're ready to start turning that frustration into a strategy and to deepen your own civic literacy, you can begin by visiting the website you see on your screen,